Dr. Will, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm great. It's good to see you, man.
A long time in the making. We've been friends for some time. I think we met. Where did we meet originally? It was like a Mind Body Green event.
There was a Mind Body Green event before the pandemic started, and I was there one night in the jacuzzi, and you rolled in, and it was like, I think it was just me, you, maybe one other person, and we were hanging out for a little bit there. So that was probably like 2018, I think. 2018 or 2019.
It was some time ago. Yeah. And you put out great work. I'm excited to have you on the show. Gut health is a topic that it's always in the zeitgeist. You know, there are trending hashtags on TikTok. Hot girls have stomach problems. I didn't come up with that. That's actually a thing. But a lot of people have, there's uncertainty, right, with regards to how to best eat to support optimal gut health.
Right.
So let's dive right in. What would you say today are the worst foods for our collective gut health?
Most of what people are eating in America right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that we have to start with ultra-processed foods. And the concern from my perspective, and I wrote about this in my first book, Fibre in 2020, is that we have created a pathway for basically, like, it's extremely friendly, far too friendly to the food industry to allow them to bring chemicals, bring food additives into our food supply without really any sort of regulatory element to check on that, make sure that it's safe before we introduce it. Because the problem is, once you get on the other side, it's really hard to draw that back. And so here we are. We have 10,000 food additives in our food supply. I'm not here to claim that every single one of them is bad. Like, I don't think that's the case. But we start to see the signal that's emerging for some of them. And it makes you concerned because they're still in our food supply. There are people going into their store today, as you and I record this, buying food, thinking that that food is perfectly fine. Maybe it's not like a health food. It doesn't always have to be a health food, but they're buying the food and it's destroying and damaging their gut, right? So like a classic example of this would be dietary emulsifiers. So if we were to take, and they exist in many different types of foods. It tends to be sort of creamy type of foods. So yes, plant-based milks, plant-based yogurts, but also ice cream and things like this. And, you know, if you think about it, like oil and water, we all know what happens there. They separate, right? So the emulsifier is introduced by the food industry to address that issue, because then you can bring these things that naturally want to separate out and you can basically blend them together, and then therefore it just sort of stays that way, right? So it's like homogeneous. Okay, so that's great. But like me personally, if you're telling me that the dietary emulsifier, and I'll dig into this a little bit more in a moment, is disrupting my gut microbiome, I would far rather my plant-based milk be separated out and I simply have to shake it when it comes out of the refrigerator. Like, that's really not that big of a deal.
Of course.
So, what we're finding is that, you know, examples of these are carboxymethylcellulose, polysorbate 80, carrageenan. And basically what we're finding is that they are extremely disruptive to the gut microbiome. We started with animal model studies, but then we graduated into human studies, where in France, they took a group of people and they assigned them to either a low emulsifier diet or a high emulsifier diet. And like what happened after that was disturbing, because within just a number of days, they had lost diversity within their gut microbiome, created inflammation that was starting within their gut and prepared to spread throughout their body, right? So now that's one example. And here we are. And the American diet is 60% ultra-processed foods. And even more disturbing to me, I'm a father of 4 children. 70% of the calories for our kids come from ultra-processed foods. Emulsifiers are one example. There are many other examples that we could dig into, whether it be like, I'm happy that we withdrew Red 3. We are not close to done there.
No.
Like, that is just the beginning, I hope, right? Like, we better not be planting any flags and declaring victory here, because that was one little thing. There's all kinds of different artificial colors, artificial flavors, and I know that people get really worked up on this topic, but artificial sweeteners, they come into contact with our gut microbiome. They are not, the vast majority of them are not absorbed.
Interesting.
So they do contact your gut. Anything that contacts your gut is going to transform your gut one way or another. Is it for your benefit or is it for your detriment? Now, if it's not absorbed, it may not impact like things in terms of your physiology on the spot. But the change that's going to occur as the result of what it does to your gut microbiome may impact your physiology in the coming 24 hours. So like, not to say that every single artificial sweetener is bad for us, but some of them, I'm quite sure they are.
What are some examples of those artificial sweeteners?
Like aspartame, right? And it's funny because aspartame is in Diet Coke. That is big business. If we're going to have regulators go into a room and have an honest conversation about whether or not aspartame is problematic for human health, why is it that you or I cannot actually be in that room, but someone that represents the beverage industry is allowed in that room? Explain that to me. Well, you don't have to. It's a rhetorical question.
No, but you're right. You're absolutely right. One question that often comes up is, well, if you had to make the choice between a traditionally sweetened soda versus one sweetened with artificial sweeteners, which is the better of those two evils?
Yeah, so you're giving me two bad choices and you're forcing me to choose, right? So, and it's interesting because we could line up a whole bunch of choices. And to me, ultimately, and I think that you would agree with this, Max, that food and nutrition is about what relative to what. Ultimately, it's a choice between things, right? So between those two choices, I would argue that the artificial sweetened beverages are probably healthier compared to the sugar-based beverage. I don't think either of them are healthy. Now, the other thing that I would introduce into the conversation while we're on this topic of those types of things, like we're talking about sodas. The other thing that I would introduce that many people perhaps have not been thinking about, we focus on the sugar, we focus on the artificial sweeteners, but what about the plastic bottle? And the fact that those beverages are clearly acidic. And when you take acid and you put it in plastic and you let it sit on your store shelf, the plastic sheds into the beverage. And then we consume it. And this is what we call, the broad term is microplastics, but really what we're talking about, to be a little more refined, is nanoplastics. Nanoplastics are not visible to the naked eye. You would need a microscope to actually see them. And to be honest, to be fair, where we are in terms of the data, we're early days. So we don't yet know with total clarity what exactly the risk is with microplastics and nanoplastics, but we know that they're ubiquitous. We know they're everywhere, right? They're in our air, they're in our water, they're in our food system, they're in seafood. There's a lot of places that you're going to find them. So we're not going to be able to completely rid them from our lives, but we can be smart and make choices to reduce our exposure to these things. And there's zero possibility that microplastics are good for us, right? So I don't want to fearmonger. I don't know where this is going to go. All I know is we have a New England Journal of Medicine paper that came out in the last, I believe, 2 years, where they took a group of people, I don't know if you saw this one, but basically they took a group of people who were undergoing a carotid endarterectomy.
I saw that study.
Yeah. So so a surgeon is going in because there's so much plaque in their neck, in an artery, that, and I'm just to contextualize this for the listeners at home, I know that you understand this, that they're going to go in, the surgeon, and open up this artery in their neck, remove this plaque, like basically scrape it out. All right. And the purpose of this is to prevent stroke. And so when they did this, they looked under a microscope at this plaque and they asked the question, like, are there nanoplastics and how much are there? And they drew a line in the sand. If you have more than this amount, it's high nanoplastic. If you are less than this amount, it's low nanoplastic within the plaque. What went on to happen is that the group that they identified as being high in nanoplastics was more likely to have a heart attack, more likely to have a stroke, more likely to die from cardiovascular disease. So now, does that mean that the nanoplastic actually caused that? No, we can't say that yet. But there's a signal there that's concerning, and we have to smarten up. So I think like the soda in the bottle is one example. I would also put tomato-based, because acidic, tomato-based products that you're buying in your store, be careful. And the
so like canned tomatoes?
Yeah. I prefer to actually get them boxed.
Interesting.
Or glass.
Wow.
Glass is the optimal. But like if we're talking about, like stewed tomatoes, you're gonna make some chili, I would prefer to have a box as opposed to the can.
Well, because tomatoes are acidic and the linings of cans are usually plastic based.
Exactly. This is the issue. Now, That also is applicable and true when we think about beverages that we're drinking. Any acidic beverage that you crack open a can, like, whoa, we have to be careful there. And then the last thing that I'll throw out there is you go to your local coffee shop. You get a cup of coffee, you bring it home. I love coffee. Do you like coffee?
I love coffee, yeah.
Okay. So I'm like I'm having an espresso here, and this is probably number 5 or 6 for today.
How many a day? How many a day is too much?
Let's circle back to that. Okay, let's circle back to that because there's an entire coffee conversation that we could easily have.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, cool. But you go to your coffee shop, you grab your favorite cup, you take it home, and you forget about it. It's sitting on your counter for 3 days. Why has that paper cup not melted through? Because it's lined with plastic. Acid is a problem. Heat is as much of a problem. So like be wary of hot beverages that come in cups that are like clearly lined with plastic. Be wary of like going to get Chinese takeout and you're getting the wonton soup and that's in that plastic container there. Like we have to think about these things.
Man, I order Thai food all the time and it comes in those plastic containers and it just kills me. But there's no alternative. Sometimes you crave good Thai food and it's the only option. Another thing that I learned recently, I didn't know this until a couple days ago, but most flavored beverages, whether or not they contain sugar, we'll just take a sugar-free flavored beverage in a plastic container. Those plastic bottles, they're hot filled. This is like industry standard. So you take a sugar-free vitamin water or whatever, they're heated. They're brought almost to boiling temperature as a form of pasteurization to kill any bacteria. And the bottles are hot filled. It's wild to me. And the reason why and this is even more shocking to add insult to injury, the reason why they don't do it to water is because it would change the flavor of the water. But because we're talking about flavored beverages, the flavors mask the plastic flavoring that would otherwise leach out.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so important to reduce your consumption of, like, irrespective of the calorie conversation, to reduce your consumption of foods that come in plastic containers.
Yeah, and even the water bottle. You know, the issue is that water bottle, you don't know what heat conditions it was exposed to and how long it's been sitting there. And the longer that it sits there, the more likely it is to accumulate these plastics. So part of the issue for those that are curious about this and are as nerdy as I am is that we haven't yet defined exactly what constitutes or how to best test for these types of plastics. So, but for people who are curious, like microplastics versus nanoplastics, just be aware that microplastics may be visible to the naked eye, and they do exist. They're all over the place. Like you would find them inside the intestines of fish, right? But that specific thing, if you're going to cut out the intestines and eat the fish, that's not so much of a concern. The concern that I'm really worried about is these nanoplastics, because those are the ones that bioaccumulate in different places. And for example, with fish, the issue is they move up the food chain. So as smaller fish accumulate nanoplastics, they are then transferred over to the larger fish that consumes the smaller fish. So as we think about things that, to be honest with you, like among all animal products, I think that I would put wild caught salmon at the top of the list, right? But now all of a sudden we have to kind of open our eyes and be a little bit more careful about that. I'm not saying they're unhealthy. I'm saying that we have to think about our sources and where we get them from.
Amen. Now, this is actually a big reason why I believe fiber to be, I mean, there's probably many reasons why fiber is beneficial to health, but you're a gastroenterologist. Isn't there a mechanism by which fiber can actually help sweep toxins out of the body? Now, I don't know if these toxins are local to the gut that the fiber is sweeping out. I know that that bile acids also contain compounds deemed for excretion, but isn't this one of the mechanisms speculated as to why fiber seems to be so consistently associated with better health?
Well, I think the main mechanism that makes fiber really beneficial to our health is the fact that the fiber, specifically fermentable fiber, comes into contact with your gut microbes and it stops being fiber. And it transforms into actually forms of fat, which are the short chain fatty acids. So butyrate, acetate, and propionate. We can dig more into what those things do, and they have a number of different beneficial effects throughout our entire body that start locally in the microbiome, include the gut barrier, extend to the immune system, which is just on the other side of the gut barrier, and ultimately will spread throughout the entire body. Like your blood-brain barrier is made up with the same cellular architecture that your gut barrier is. So when we talk about, leaky brain, right? People who are having brain fog, the blood-brain barrier involves epithelial cells with tight junctions, held together by tight junctions. And the way that we repair and restore tight junctions is actually with butyrate. So most of the benefits, and I'm happy to dig into this as much as you want to here today, but most of the benefits from fiber come from the fermentation of fiber. That's mostly soluble fiber. The insoluble fiber is the grit or the roughage, and that sweeps through us. And as it's doing that, it leads to good, healthy bowel movements. I would make the argument that good, healthy bowel movements are, like, to me, essential for life, for a great day. And our gut, it really thrives on rhythm. When we fall out of rhythm, which could be constipation, could be diarrhea, with clarity, we know this is associated with changes to the gut microbiome that we do not want. So ultimately, the goal is to help us to achieve good, regular, complete, sausage-shaped, soft but formed bowel movements. So my wife tells me all the time I talk about poop way too comfortably.
Well, it's important. We need to normalize this conversation, right? I mean, it's taboo, but if you're not pooping well, I mean, pooping is one of the main routes of detox, right?
100%.
I mean, people overspend on detox teas and cleanses and juices and things like that all the time. But if you're not taking care of the fundamentals, right? I mean, this is like first principles. You got to be pooping regularly.
Right. Yes. And I think a big part of that detox is actually what's going on with the gut microbiome, because these gut microbes play an essential role in so many different aspects, including the elimination of toxins. An example would be glyphosate, like the elimination of toxins from our diet. They transform our medications. So, and I think, like, this is part of the reason why, not to say this is the only reason why, but any doctor that comes in here and speaks with you will vouch for this, that you prescribe a medication, you may know that, the normal result is this. Some people get a better than normal result, but unfortunately, some people get a horrible result and have an adverse effect, right? How do we explain that? If we knew that going in, we would handle that very differently. Where's that coming from? I think a big part of that story is the way in which your unique gut microbiome is metabolizing that drug, which leads to a certain effect on the body. So, and then you mentioned bile acids. Bile acids are another example where their gut microbiome actually plays a really important role in transforming these bile acids. Some of them get excreted, some of them come back into the body. Let the gut microbiome determine what we need and what we don't need.
And that's also the mechanism by which fiber can lower lipids and stuff like that, right? Like, isn't cholesterol, like our livers, this is probably very simplified, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, but our livers basically suck out LDL particles from circulation and use the cholesterol that those particles would otherwise be charting around to create these bile acids. And then when you consume fiber, the fiber basically traps them in this matrix, this poop matrix.
That's right.
And then we excrete it.
Yep, that's absolutely right. Yeah. That's true. And also, there's some interesting research. Now, I'm not here to pretend that this is the most profound thing that exists in weight loss, but there is some research. Like, you think about counting calories, and people assume that what goes in your mouth is what you absorb into your body. And that's not exactly true. And so if you look at the poop, you could burn the poop and determine how much energy is actually there. And when they look at people who are consuming a higher fiber diet, ultimately they're excreting and pooping out more energy.
Wow.
So in other words, your body, whatever it is that you ate, your body is not necessarily getting access to all of it. And that allows you to achieve, yes, there's that calorie deficit that you kept track of on your chronometer or whatever it may be. but there's also what's actually physiologically happening on the inside that you're not even aware of. But boom, you just had that massive bowel movement that was very healthy, very satisfying. And in there was a lot of energy that you didn't actually need.
So basically, fiber helps you poop out. You can actually poop out calories by eating.
You can actually poop out
more
calories.
fiber.
Yeah, and again, this is not. I'm not talking about 500 calories a day, but like I am talking about something that could be in the range of 100 to 250 calories per day.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's the relationship between fiber and GLP-1? A lot of people now are talking about these GLP-1 agonist drugs.
Are they?
Semaglutide.
I haven't heard anything about this.
Yeah, nothing, right?
No.
All the rage. But
Yeah.
you're now starting to see as a reaction, I guess, to the fervor surrounding these drugs. And I think that they are revolutionary drugs. I wouldn't, recommend them as like a first line, but you're now seeing the food industry, of course, respond, and many high fiber foods I've noticed now will, there will be health claims like this is a GLP-1 friendly food or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, so just to be totally clear for your audience, when you walk into the center of your supermarket and they market to you in some sort of boxed good that's clearly an ultra processed food, high fiber or prebiotic or whatever it may be, some sort of gut health claim, generally speaking, if you showed that to me, I would tell you, save your money. Go back to the produce section, right? Go find something else. So we have to be careful with these kinds of things. Like these health claims that exist on ultra processed foods, it's health washing, right? And a lot of times, like a lot of the stuff that they put in, Max, like the fiber that they'll add to a product is the cheapest, most gas producing fiber that exists.
Give me some examples like tapioca starch, fiber.
Dude, I don't want to trash brands, but like, back in 2008, right? Those were early days of understanding what is a prebiotic. And inulin is what came forward as like the thing. Okay. So I want to explain what inulin is in a moment. But before I go there, inulin is this fiber that exists within asparagus and Jerusalem artichokes. And when you hear people talk about those foods, they're referring to inulin. Okay. Inulin is not the only prebiotic. When it's being used in these products, this is an extraction. So unnatural. You have to apply chemicals to basically extract the inulin fiber from these foods, right? No longer is the rest of the food there. And inulin is pure fructan. So for people who have heard of a low FODMAP diet, FODMAPs are the fermentable parts of our food. They're not inherently bad, but for people who have gut issues, they can absolutely cause bloating and digestive distress. So in my books, like in Fibre Fueled, I have a 4-week plan in the back. The first 2 weeks are completely low FODMAP because I want to introduce these things to people in a gentle way, right? So that sort of explains the approach. Okay, let's imagine that you're a person who has gut issues. You walk into the supermarket, you see something that says prebiotic. It has a gut health claim on the side of it, all right? If you flip it over, you may look, you'll see it says it has 3 grams or 5 grams of inulin. That is pure FODMAP, 100% fermentable to turn into tons of gas. And don't get me wrong, are there microbiome benefits to be had? Sure. Is that the way that I would go about it if I were working with you as a gastroenterologist? Absolutely not. When you take that inulin, which by the way, I just want to add, like to add 3 grams or 5 grams of inulin to a product, we're talking about like on the side of the producer, the manufacturer, pennies. Pennies. But now you have a health claim. Now this is a gut health product.
Wow.
You can market the heck out of that. And your price like just went up a lot.
Wow.
Right? Now, you go and you drink this, let's just pretend it's a carbonated beverage that has this inulin in it, right? Okay, that carbonated beverage, it has to come out, like the gas from the carbonation has to come out one side or the other. So you're either belching it out or you're farting it out. Those are the two options. Meanwhile, it is bundled with multiple grams of inulin so that they can have the gut health claim, because you can't do it with 1 gram. You have to have enough to make the gut health claim. So you have a couple grams of inulin in there. Guess what? That turns into farts. Like you're definitely farting. There is no doubt. So you thought that you were fixing your gut and you feel like trash.
That's
right?
awful.
Right. And this to me, like this is the problem that we run into, is that when we allow health claims using this type of logic and approach, okay, like they have met technically, they have met the criteria to make the claim. So if this is the rule, then we have to allow it.
It's maddening. I think that's what I would like to see RFK Jr. accomplish. I think it should be, I think ultra processed foods should be barred from making health claims. I mean, it drives me wild that commercial cereals you'll see so regularly are adorned by the heart check logo from the American Heart Association. Corn oil, canola oil. I mean, you regularly see this. It's like nobody needs to consume more canola oil for heart health. It's like the healthiest items in the supermarket. They're quiet, right? Like
there's no health claim there.
There's no health claim.
Right.
It's so frustrating.
Right, but there's no, and the flip side of this is like, okay, if you were in theory to continue to allow the health claims, then we should 100% require transparency, right? So you can spray your oats with glyphosate. You and I would never know. It's not on the packaging. That's not fair.
Right.
The consumer is in a vulnerable position going and trying to buy what they consider to be a healthy breakfast, right? And bringing home something that was sprayed with glyphosate that's going to disrupt their gut microbiome.
Yeah, and wheat and oats in particular are... The glyphosate's not simply used to grow these crops, but glyphosate is used to like dry them out pre-harvest.
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions is people go, oh, it's genetically modified. Well, that is true for corn and for soy, to be genetically modified to basically be glyphosate tolerant. But in the case of wheat, no, you harvest it, you need to dry it out. Your model actually accelerates and you make more money by drying it out as quickly as possible. So using an herbicide designed to kill plants, it will also kill wheat, dry it out, and now you can basically push it into the supermarket as quickly as possible.
Why does there seem to be so much contention within even the evidence-based community about the safety of these like herbicides? Like you'll often see people on social media, like when you sound an alarm about, heightened levels of glyphosate were detected in commercial oats and stuff like that. There's always somebody that comes out of the woodwork like glyphosate is the most studied chemical in human history. It's safe. You could drink it. We should be putting it in the water supply. Like it's crazy to me the amount of apologism that you'll see for these kinds of industrial chemicals, big ag chemicals.
Yeah. I mean, you were being very kind by calling it the evidence-based community right there. Because the thing about this is, are there some people who may not see it the way that I see it? Yes, that's okay. I'm happy to have a conversation about this topic, right? And I will explain where I come with the glyphosate in just a moment. But there's also some people that it's really interesting how quickly they go from hearing what your opinion is on a topic to trying to slit your throat and destroy all credibility that you have. And it's interesting how with those particular people where they're very consistent with this, like the level of anger and aggression, I'm like very impressed because it's been a long time since I've been that angry. Like, I don't know, years. It takes something pretty heavy to get me really going like that. The amount of anger and aggression that comes like that. Boom, the minute you drop the G-bomb, you're in trouble, right? And it's kind of interesting how we as consumers, like, I think a lot of people like to sit back and watch the fight, but why don't we take a quick moment to actually go and dig into some of the people who we're talking about here? Because if you go and you start to look into this and you pull back the curtain, it's not hard to find evidence of connections that if they were brought to the surface, you'd be concerned about that. So, I mean, I just have to think that there are times when people are just so overtly agenda driven that it doesn't feel balanced at all. Because if you really felt like you opposed my view and you were truly being evidence-based about this, you would want to hear what I have to say and you would want to entertain my thought.
100%.
Right? So here's what I have to say, that with glyphosate, we sit there and we go, oh, well, this is non-toxic to humans. Okay, cool. I'm glad that we don't die on the spot. Our body is far too resilient, thankfully, to be exposed to glyphosate or carrageenan or red number 3, and we don't die immediately. Cool, that's great. But here's the issue, that we know with clarity that milligrams, sometimes micrograms of medications have profound effects on the body. And glyphosate, in very, very, very small amounts, has profound effects on the gut microbiome. And I don't think that's disputable. Our human cells, they may seem to be okay. But if we are disrupting and damaging the gut microbiome, that is a part of our physiology. That is an important part of the way that our body works. So that's problematic.
It's the forgotten organ. I mean, it's essentially an organ, right? Like the gut microbiome has orders of magnitude more genetic material, has all kinds of functions that we've co-evolved with. And just because it's technically on the outside of our bodies, right? Like it's in the gut lumen, so it's not technically inside of us. It is inside of us, but that's technically the environment. It's sort of written off, right? As being not important, that this chemical synthetic industrial input is altering its function. We should be a lot more skeptical of what's going on.
If our primary focus was human health, we would get very interested and focused on the gut microbiome, because what we're seeing is a generational decline in the health of the gut microbiome that's occurring within the United States. And the consequences of what this is doing to our digestive health. As a gastroenterologist, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, acid reflux, celiac disease, they all have gut microbiome origins. But it's not just digestion. It's our immune system. 70% of our immune system is in the lining of our gut. It's our metabolism. So whether we're talking about weight gain, hypertension, high blood pressure, hyperlipidemia, type 2 diabetes, all of these things, we acknowledge that 88% of America is metabolically unhealthy. All of those conditions related to being metabolically unhealthy are connected back to the gut microbiome. I mean, I'm not saying that's the only factor, but this is clearly a factor in those things. Our mood, our cognitive health, connected to the gut microbiome, our hormones, hormonal balance. In men, testosterone levels. You hear about the decline of testosterone levels in men, right? And simultaneously occurring is the decline of our gut microbiome. In women, multiple different hormonal-based conditions, which include fertility, also include things like polycystic ovary syndrome, endometriosis. So the gut is connected to so many different things. It's inconvenient for industry that has a product that it has brought to market perhaps in the 80s or 90s to have science progress, where testing that was not available in the 80s or 90s for the gut microbiome is now available, right? And if we're being rigorous about protecting human health, we would absolutely acknowledge this. 3 pounds, 38 trillion microorganisms living inside you, connected to all those different facets of your health. But that's not what's happening. Can you change that?
We got to change it.
I want you to change that.
I'm trying to do my part.
Call up Bobby.
Well, it's like you brought up the grass loophole earlier, that we've basically just allowed our food supply to be flooded with these industrial additives. We basically let the onus of the burden of proof sit on the food manufacturers, basically, to self-assess these chemicals. And whether or not we can fix that system and make it look more like how they operate in the EU with the precautionary principle, that still doesn't mean that the 10,000 or so food additives that are currently on the market are suddenly out of the doghouse. Like, we need to actually retroactively go back and I think look at all those. And also, various chemicals are not even, obviously the endocrine disrupting, the microplastics, like those are not indicated on the ingredients lists, but even within natural flavors, and I consume plenty of foods with natural flavors, but even within those umbrella terms, there are hundreds of chemicals that are not disclosed to consumers.
Yeah.
And probably also bear that GRAS designation.
Yeah. So there's many different things that are potentially problematic there. On the topic of this, so what you're bringing forward is, let me just say that I have a company that I started myself called 38 Terra, and we have a product that is, from my perspective as a gastroenterologist who has treated people with fiber supplements for a very long time, this is me trying to deliver the the prebiotic supplement that I always wished I could have had for my patients. And one of the problems that exists from my perspective, Max, is that whether it be our food or our supplements, do you have confidence that it's clean? Do you know what's actually in the package, right? Because I feel like for our consumers, they deserve that. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with this is, and I don't want to hijack the conversation and talk about this product too much. Maybe we'll come back to it later. But with regard to what you were just saying, one of the things that was a specific point from my perspective that's really important is to test the heck out of it. So every single batch of product that we produce, we apply more than 120 different tests to. That includes for GMOs, that includes for pesticides. We have actually these really interesting food intolerance tests that I have to push the laboratory to give me the technology that I need. Allergens, heavy metals, all these things. Okay, so this is part of having confidence. Is not just that the testing was done, but like we provide those results to the individual person. You take the package, you enter your lot number, you get a report. That report tells you all those results that I just mentioned. So the other thing that we're doing is we're getting it NSF certified.
That's important.
And so for people who don't know what that means, basically NSF is the organization that will certify supplements so that if you were a professional athlete and you want to have confidence that you're buying a supplement that is pure and not going to cause you to fail a drug test, that's what NSF certification does. So we'll be NSF certified in the next few weeks. My point with this is that to me is the way that we should be approaching these issues. We have natural flavors in our product, but I've tested the heck out of it. And from my perspective, this is just me. I mean, maybe people feel otherwise, but I would rather a product where I can have a report of 130 different things, know that they're not there, know that it's clean. I would take that over organic personally. Organic, you assume that it's clean. I really hope it is. You don't really know.
Yeah, organic is not a panacea. It's not a perfect system.
Exactly.
But it's, I think, the best of what's available.
Well, especially when it comes to glyphosate.
Yeah.
So like our product is certified glyphosate free. So the beautiful thing is you don't have to worry about that. But for most products that are out there in the supermarket, you don't know. You have no clue. You want to get a fiber supplement. You go to get Benefiber. This is one of the issues that I've seen is like Benefiber, which is readily available at every drugstore in America. It's very easy to take. It will help you in terms of gut symptoms, but it's wheat dextrin. So this is a wheat-based product. Do you have any transparency or clarity whether or not that product was sprayed with glyphosate? You don't know.
Never thought about it that way. Yeah. Very interesting. I'm a big fan of psyllium husk.
Yeah.
Are you a fan?
I am. I'm a fan of psyllium husk. So but the same issue exists with psyllium husk. So psyllium husk is sort of the gold standard fiber supplement for gastroenterologists. It's written into our guidelines. There's multiple different situations or scenarios where you can use it. So irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, psyllium husk can help. All right. But it's the same issue, which is that you get Metamucil. Do you know that the psyllium husk is clean? Do you know that it hasn't been sprayed with pesticides or other agrochemicals? You don't. So do I believe that this can help people? Yes, I do. But I would much prefer to have a product that is clean and has actually been tested and proven so.
Sometimes you hear about glyphosate comes up in the context of leaky gut, and then leaky gut is controversial. I feel like there are many on social media. I've seen PhDs come out and say leaky gut's a myth.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah,
is leaky gut a myth? Is it pseudoscience?
All right. So there's language that becomes really important here. Leaky gut syndrome is a myth because basically people have sort of made up this idea that there's this confluence of different symptoms occurring throughout the body that are part of this syndrome, like this diagnosis. That's not an acknowledged diagnosis. So we can't say that leaky gut syndrome is real. Now let's take leaky gut though, this concept. I was skeptical myself, but actually, what we're really talking about here, if we zoom in on the gut and what's happening there, inside the tube of your intestine, there live 38 trillion microbes. And they're surrounded by what we call the epithelial barrier. It's a single layer of cells connected by these tight junctions. And this single layer of cells is what separates the inside of your intestine from your bloodstream. which basically means access to your entire body. Something that gets into your bloodstream could hit your brain within a few seconds. So this concept of leaky gut, really, the terminology that like I would prefer is increased intestinal permeability. And it basically means disruption or breakdown of this gut barrier. Now, your gut turns over faster and more than any other cell in your entire body. Every 3 to 5 days, you have a completely brand new gut lining.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And we want to support your body in terms of that process of basically like bringing on a brand new gut lining every 3 to 5 days. The way that we accomplish that is by making sure that those tight junctions that fasten the cells together are able to form properly. And how we do that is with butyrate. So butyrate specifically is the short chain fatty acid that has been associated with repairing and restoring the gut barrier. There's nothing that I've come across that helps more than butyrate in terms of accomplishing that specific goal. Anytime that we have disruption within the gut microbiome, so when it falls out of balance, when it becomes an inflammatory gut microbiome, the consequence of that is leaky gut. Anytime we get leaky gut, the consequence of that, where the gut barrier is not formidable anymore, the consequence of that is that now things start to get access to your immune system. So something called lipopolysaccharide that exists within the gut lumen starts to sneak across. Your immune system has been trained through millions, if not billions of years of evolution, far predating the existence of us as humans. Your immune system was trained to identify its old enemy, lipopolysaccharide, and activate. That's inflammation. So the reason why leaky gut is a big deal is because of that. The fact that when the gut barrier is not intact, it allows these things like lipopolysaccharide to sneak across. And that leads to what we would call chronic low-grade inflammation, which is at the root of many of the health conditions that we see across the United States today.
It's also referred to as endotoxin, is it not?
Yeah. Lipopolysaccharide and endotoxin are synonymous.
Wow.
So by the way, I want to tell you some of these things that you've been mentioning are in your book. I know that you don't need me to tell you this, but I wanted to tell you that I read your book cover to cover.
Oh, thank you.
And I thought that you did an incredible job.
Thank you so much. No, that means a lot coming from you. I'm very proud of the microbiome chapter in Genius Foods.
I thought the microbiome chapter was great. You mentioned that our ancestors ate 150 grams of fiber per day twice. So I consider that a shout out. And I also thought that honestly, it was a very balanced book. You are in this book as I was reading it, maybe I'm biased, but I felt like you're far more plant-based than people may realize.
Yeah.
So out of 10 foods, 7 of the 10 foods are plant-based foods, right? So, I mean, to me, I understand your position on many different topics, and I may not be on board with all of it, but actually I think that there's this common ground that exists between us, which I think is important, because for outsiders who may be tuning in and hearing this podcast, they're like, oh, Will and Max are going to talk? They have different perspectives on things. Actually, I think that there's a lot more common ground than people may realize.
Oh, 100%. And I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. I'm not a carnivore. I think that's sometimes the brush that I get painted with. And I will admit that I do probably spend a disproportionate amount of time pushing back to what I see as being a lot of dogma and zealotry and misinformation from the plant-based advocates.
Does it have to be plant-based? Do we have to call them the plant-based advocates?
We can call them whatever you want. But it also comes from the industry, because ultra-processed foods tend to be plant-based, right? Like Just Egg or Beyond Meat or the Impossible Burger. They're just much more profitable, and then you find yourself going up against these institutions. Like I feel like Harvard has had a plant-based bias for a very long time, and that permeates a lot of the studies that they produce, which generate headlines because, of course, it's Harvard. And so I will admit that I probably spend a disproportionate amount of time pushing back against that. But you're 100% right when you characterize my actual recommendations, which are, I take a protein forward approach, but I also am a big advocate of dark leafy greens, berries, whole plants, and things like that. And I've always been. I mean, if you look at the cover of my book, the vast majority of the real estate on my brain diagram is given to.
Well, I was going to say, I thought that actually, if you look at the cover of your book, if that were a plate and a person were eating that plate, it would be a very balanced and fair plate.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people love to argue in the margins, but I think if you're actually grounded in science and logic, you're going to end up agreeing on 95% of the areas of
Yeah, I think that's true. Well,
debate.
because I think that the thing is that as you and I sit here right now, I think that we would both mutually agree that in this average American diet where 60% of calories are coming from ultra processed foods, we would like to replace that. Right. And I think that you would agree with me that the fiber intake, because you wrote about this in your book, the fiber intake in America is completely inadequate.
Yeah.
We're not even close. So we have to start by addressing that specific issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, if we were to move, replace the ultra processed foods with whole plant foods in the way that you describe in your book, if we were to do that and we not even change the animal product consumption at all, but we improve the quality of that animal product consumption, I think that that's a diet that you would get on board with. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like our health has obviously gotten worse and worse over the past few decades. Consumption of beef, for example, has declined. Our consumption of chicken has gone up. Our consumption of ultra-processed foods has skyrocketed. Added sugar has mostly skyrocketed, although I feel like I've seen trends where it's maybe on the decline subtly. I don't recall. Our consumption of vegetable oils and stuff like that has skyrocketed. So there are all these variables that I think make nutrition research really hard to do. I generally think that animal source foods, red meat, I think red meat is a health food. I think that we can get granular and there's a tendency to want to let perfect be the enemy of the good. If I had all the money in the world and I could continually feed myself and my family regenerative, grass-fed, grass-finished meat, which, just putting the conversation about the environment and food equity and all that stuff on the back burner, if I could provide my family that kind of meat all the time, I mean, I would, but also I don't necessarily think that a piece of lean meat from the conventional system is unhealthy. I think you were saying earlier, it's always about what are we comparing the food to, right? It's always going to be a much better option, in my view, than what most Americans are currently eating for dinner.
Yeah. Do you worry about the antibiotics in the conventional system, though?
I don't. I think you've got to major in the majors and focus on the big rocks. And in a time when so many people are struggling with metabolic illness and overweight, I think to fearmonger one of our most satiating and nutrient dense foods, I think that can produce harm. I really do. I think we got to stop fear-mongering animal source foods. I think we also need to support, because the other thing is that plant-based foods are not impervious to the consequences of industrial production either, right?
Sure.
Like a lot of plant-based foods now harbor
there's
kale,
issues. I've been, I think,
cadmium,
upfront about that.
Yeah. So there are risks and benefits to every single food. But as long as we can push our listeners to a more whole foods based diet, and now with all the research coming out on the value of prioritizing protein, I think that that's really we can get granular and we can split hairs and all that stuff. But for most people, because also, and I know you have major media experience as well, I've had the privilege of getting to go on the biggest TV shows in the United States, and I'm hyper aware, because I've been doing TV the entirety of my career at this point. I'm hyper aware of the people that I'm reaching. I'm reaching people who live nearby a Whole Foods and an Erewhon, but I'm also reaching people who are watching from behind the counter during their 9 to 5 at the gas station or whatever,
Yeah.
And I just don't think we can let perfect be the enemy of the good. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I've always said progress over perfection. I love that. I certainly am not striving towards perfection, nor am I perfect myself. I do the best that I can.
Yeah.
I think though that there's value to, so let me put it this way. In my community, if there were people who were to thrive choosing, using the information that they can receive from you, I would 100% support that. because I'm results driven. Like as a medical doctor, that's what I care about. I don't care whether or not you adhere directly to the exact things that I say, nor do I care at all if you match the diet that I eat. I don't expect you to, nor would I want you to. You got to find what works for you. So, and I would imagine that in the same regard, if there's people within your community that are like, you know what, I feel better with a more plant-based approach. Maybe it's not 100% plant-based. I don't think that's what I'm actually advocating for. I don't think that I ever really have been advocating for that. Like to me, I'm more about, I see it as like this. I'm speaking to the person who was me in 2012, right? And that person was eating fast food twice a day. And I'm trying to take that person and show them a way that they can improve their health. And I think that I'm quite sure that you have your own version of that sort of approach, because I know that having read your book, like the inspiration that came in a challenging way from your mom and everything that happened with her. So I know that like you have your perspective of how you want to help people, and that's what you're trying to do.
I mean, I don't think that it's different from yours. I think it's the same. It's just that we have, maybe a different view of how to get there. But I think that both ways are, first of all, going to be an improvement on the standard American diet.
Right.
And they're both going to provide different types of benefits. I mean, like I think one of the benefits of eating plants is that they're very satiating. Like whole plants are satiating, and they're low in calorie density.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because you asked me, and I think we somehow got diverted into a major tangent. You asked me about GLP-1.
Yeah.
Right. So we probably need to circle back to that because I know that people are curious about that. So GLP-1 and the other gut satiety hormones are what we describe as incretin hormones that are produced within our gut in response to what's happening, including our food. And it's interesting because fiber consistently shows up as being satiating. How does that work? The way it works is that fiber, if you slow down the way that you eat, which in some ways eating a high plant diet requires you to do that, right? Because you have to chew more and things like this. If you slow down the way that you eat, you give these things an opportunity to get to a point in your intestine where you can actually have the release of short chain fatty acids, and these short chain fatty acids that we've been talking about, they actually activate receptors that lead to the release of GLP-1. All right, and then what happens from that point is that your stomach stops moving, you feel more full, your blood sugar gets better control, your pancreas produces a little more insulin, and your brain has been notified that you've had enough. It's not just to be clear, it's not a pure fiber thing. I'm not advocating or saying that this is only about fiber. There's other aspects. Protein is important. So if we really want to get good about this, we would combine the two. We would have both protein and fiber in the same meal, make sure that they're both present. That's going to help us to activate the GLP-1, and that's going to make us feel satiated, feel full. When you look at studies, one of the advantages that exists of a more plant-forward approach, doesn't have to be vegan, just more plant-forward, is this, that our natural break, our natural ability to acknowledge that we feel full, it shows up. And then we stop when we're supposed to, and we avoid overeating. The major problem that exists with the ultra-processed foods is that they are hyperpalatable. And basically what this means is, the first time I heard this expression, like they're hyperpalatable foods, everyone was talking about this on social media. Okay, like what does that really mean? Well, they've basically found, like if you and I were food scientists, then our job is not people's health. Our job would be to create food that is in some way superior. It could be that it lasts longer on the shelf. I'm not here to say that's a bad thing. Or that it's more efficient, meaning there's less loss of calories, right? Or it could be that like we want it to taste better.
Yeah. Can't fault food manufacturers for that.
No. And like they sell more if you buy more, right? In the sense that like you like it, you're going to buy more, and therefore it's good for their profit margins. All right. Well, basically what they found is kind of interesting. There's been research on this. The concept of hyperpalatability comes down to a combination of sugar, fat, and salt. If you combine 2 out of the 3 in sufficient quantities, then you create a hyperpalatable food where people will want more. It basically like activates those dopamine sensors in our brain where we're like zing, and then you come back. So it's this combination, and by the way, it's unnatural. That's not what you would find in nature, right? Of like excessive amounts of sodium plus sugar, or sodium plus fat, or fat plus sugar. And if you do that, that's how you create hyperpalatable. And this is why in the Kevin Hall research at the NIH, they find that people are over consuming food when they go with an ultra processed diet by multiple hundred calories per day.
By like a huge swing. It's like 800 calories.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a big problem. I mean, I understand where food manufacturers come from. They want to create repeat customers. Like if you told me that my cooking was hyperpalatable, I would take that as a massive compliment.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely makes it difficult to pump the brakes when you've got an open bag of chips sitting in front of you or a pint of ice cream.
Right. So here we are, and we have these drugs, and the GLP-1 drugs are designed to basically take advantage of this physiologic response that we evolved to have to basically tell us like when you're satiated, when you've had enough to eat. So the concept is like, okay, people have lost their sense. Like they don't know what full is anymore because they're just so strung out on these hyperpalatable foods. So we could restore that with a drug that lingers in your system 24 hours a day. Like basically give that injection, let that drug hang in the system, and perpetually activate these GLP-1 receptors so that you shut down the stomach, so that you feel full all the time, so that your colon shuts down, right? So basically what we're doing is we're really just making it so that people end up in a calorie deficit without being hungry.
Yeah.
I'm not claiming that fiber or fiber plus protein is the same as taking a GLP-1 drug. That being said, when it comes to your diet, I think the dietary quality is really important. And it doesn't matter whether you're on a GLP-1 drug or not on a GLP-1 drug, your dietary quality continues to be really important. The problem that exists from my perspective is that we have this setup where we are creating a problem with our diet, and then we're bypassing the opportunity to talk to people about their diet and how they can improve it, or how they can apply lifestyle measures that might include exercise or time-restricted eating or things of this variety to get better control over their metabolism and the way in which they eat. We're bypassing that. We're jumping straight to here's our pharmacologic solution.
It's a huge problem.
And so now that drug, like compounded fine, still a couple $100 a month, from the company, over $1,000 a month. All right. And we don't know what's going to happen long term. So we have people in their 20s and their 30s who are starting these drugs. And basically, like what we know with total clarity is that if you stop taking the drug, you're going to gain back all the weight that you lost. So we don't yet have any research to say that, hey, here's a protocol where we can give you the drug, change your diet, introduce exercise, like clean these things up, make them better, then withdraw the drug and see you actually like keep the weight off. That doesn't yet exist. So in essence, the drug as it currently stands is a lifelong commitment. So we're going to take people in their 20s and 30s and give this for the next 50 years, 60 years. I have an issue with that. And, a quick example, like this is something that gastroenterologists, we think about a lot because in a clinic, like, you see 20 people in a half day, a huge percentage of them are people who are going to have upper stomach issues, acid reflux. Okay, Max, for 20 years, the approach to this patient was, here's your proton pump inhibitor. Here's your Nexium. Here's your Prilosec. Here's Protonix. Like these are the choices. All right, just give it. There's no risk. That's like legitimately what gastroenterologists believed. Mm-hmm. And then maybe about 10 years ago, maybe a little more than 10 years ago, actually, studies started to emerge. And at first I was highly skeptical. These are association studies where people who are taking these drugs, proton pump inhibitors, are at increased risk for having a heart attack, increased risk for chronic kidney disease, increased risk for Alzheimer's. It's not easy to prove because we don't have like 20-year randomized controlled trials, right? So ultimately, this is what we have, these associations, these epidemiologic studies. But
there's also mechanistic plausibility.
Well,
right?
This is the issue, is that eventually we started to realize and discover, hold up, this seems very rational and obvious now, but cutting stomach acid is going to change the microbiome. And many of these people are developing dysbiosis as a result of chronic, perpetual use over many years of these drugs. So the point, from my perspective with that, is that this is an unintended consequence that just was not on our radar. And it wasn't for about 20 years of use that we finally started to realize, there's a problem here, right? So this is my point, is whether it's food and the additives in our food system, or whether it's drugs and the fact that the drug company is not going to give you an off-ramp, not going to give you some sort of way to get off of the medication. They want to get you on, and they want to keep you on. All right. In both of those cases, we won't know for a very long time until we start to see people having complications. That's the issue. So now I would be remiss as a medical doctor if I didn't sit here and acknowledge that this is not, I'm not saying that all people are wrong to take GLP-1s, nor should they feel bad about it. That is certainly not the case. And there are absolutely people who do need these drugs. People with morbid obesity who have tried diet and lifestyle and it has failed. Those are the people who need these drugs. But that's not what I'm seeing out there, Max. I know that's not what's happening here in Los Angeles.
No, definitely not.
And in Charleston, South Carolina, that's not what's happening there either. Right? We have other choices that we could make that could elevate our health and not have the potential risk of, even if you're microdosing it, because we don't know what the effect of that is, microdosing these drugs because you want to look good for swimsuit season.
Oh, yeah. I see that all the time in Los Angeles. Or there's rumors of it. I don't directly perceive it.
Rumors.
It's
in the tabloids.
It's in the yeah, all over the place. Just eat more fiber and protein. So wait, so my question is, okay, so you advocate for a plant forward approach. Do you also, as a gastroenterologist, you also have a protein target? Because obviously there's now a lot of talk about the relationship between skeletal muscle health and longevity, healthy aging, the relationship between skeletal muscle and metabolic health. And there's a growing body of literature showing, higher protein diets seem to be supportive of all this stuff.
Yeah.
So how do you achieve, do you have a protein target? And if so,
Sure.
How do you achieve that protein target
Yeah.
when prioritizing also high fiber foods, plants, and stuff like that?
Protein is important. Despite being a plant-based advocate, I'm not here to say that protein doesn't matter. Protein is important. All right. But people are not working out. Let's start there, right? Let's get people up and moving their bodies. It doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be CrossFit. Literally, I would start with people taking a walk in their neighborhood for 30 minutes in the morning, ideally with another person, having a conversation. That is a great place for us to start. When it comes to this question that you're asking me, here's my point is I just think that we need to get people get people more physically active, because you're not building muscle mass by the food that you eat by itself.
Yeah. But these are not mutually exclusive concepts. Yes,
No.
What you're saying is very important, but also how are you hitting your protein target?
Yeah. So one comes first. So exercise has to come first. Okay. So now protein targets from my perspective, I don't think that the target of 0.8 grams per kilogram is ideal.
That's
right.
That's the current RDA.
That's the current RDA. And when we define that as the RDA, that would be like me saying that the fiber target of 25 grams for women and 38 grams for men is ideal. I don't think that's ideal. I think that we need more than that, right? So the same is true for protein. I think that we need more than that to be optimal in terms of our protein. I also, though, Max, don't think that unless a person is super hardcore in the gym, I don't think we need to be going up to 2.2 grams per kilo, which is what some people are throwing around right now.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. So then we can find a place that exists that's more towards the middle that is quite achievable, which is 1.2 to 1.6. Like that to me is the range. I'm talking about grams per kilo of body weight on a daily basis. That's the range that I would ideally love to see people in.
Yeah, that's what I try to hit. 1.6.
There you go.
Yeah. Sometimes I go higher, but 1.6 is very achievable. And that I think if you do the math, it's like something like 0.72 times your ideal weight, which is a proxy for lean mass generally.
So if a person is, so again, like step one, go to the gym, right? Because like if we want to build muscle mass, that's way more important than starting with the protein.
Although, you know what I heard recently? I had, God, what's his name? His name is escaping me. He's an exercise scientist, very legit. Bill, oh my God. How am I forgetting his name? Really brilliant exercise scientist, Canadian, I believe. And he said that for people on low protein diets, I didn't know this.
Yeah.
That increase their just the increase of protein alone will build muscle mass if you're on a low protein diet.
Build or preserve?
I think.
Like because there's a difference in points of relativity here.
Yeah.
Here's my point: is building implies that a person, in theory, it doesn't have to be you or I, but like a person is able to take where they are today and actually hypertrophy.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to, I don't think that's possible. Whereas the flip side is that comparing a higher protein diet to a lower protein diet, you may preserve muscle mass because the lower protein diet may cause recession if you're not exercising faster. So protein is important for recovery. Protein is important for building muscle mass. I would encourage everyone, regardless of their dietary pattern, whether they're plant-based, not plant-based, doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
You should be working out.
100%.
And you should be making sure that you're able to achieve your fitness goals with an adequate amount of protein. And that to me is 1.2 to 1.6, depending on how active you are.
I think that's a great target. Bill Campbell, PhD. I just want to give him a name drop because we have an episode with him coming out. On his episode, he said that if you're on this doesn't apply to people who are eating adequate protein and then jack their protein. But if you're on a low protein diet and then you increase it, like below a certain threshold, protein is rate limiting in like your muscle retention is what I gather. And so you get that to a normal healthy level and then you'll, I guess, add muscle. But then to add any muscle beyond that, you've got to actually lift. That's like the primary variable.
Cool. I agree.
What are your favorite gut health supporting foods? I mean, fiber, but that's pretty general. Like,
yeah.
like you put Dr. Will into the produce section of an Erewhon. Like,
sure.
Where are you heading first?
How much is that going to cost?
Way too much.
Yeah, okay.
It's going to cost your mortgage.
Yeah. We shop at Food Lion sometimes, so or Costco. Actually, so in my first book, I'll run through this real quick. I mean, I had a acronym that I like to use that gives me some general foods that I like to focus on. So the acronym is FGOALS. F for fiber, FGOALS. All right, so fruit and fermented, greens and grains. So grains, by the way, not refined grains, just to be totally clear. Like I'm talking about quinoa, sorghum, teff, farro. Like to me, organic, those are healthy. Maybe you disagree with that.
Spill the tea on gluten. Is gluten good for us?
How much time do we have? All right, so I want to unpack it real quick because I did see your perspective on gluten, and I'm slightly different. So let's start with this.
Sure, and I eat it, by the way. I eat sourdough bread.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I think that's the healthiest bread, and that's a fermented food. So, all right, the gluten-containing grains, there's three, and that's wheat, barley, and rye. Okay, so those are the gluten-containing grains. The other grains, a lot of the ones that I just mentioned, quinoa, sorghum, teff, etc., those do not contain gluten. All right, there's some interesting research. So people say, oh, well, gluten is disruptive to the gut microbiome, Alicio Fasano. I understand what he's saying, and I understand that he believes in his own research. Of course he does. But this is preclinical work. This is not human research. This is not you and I being fed bread and then assessing whether or not we have increased intestinal permeability. So the issue that exists is there was a paper in Gastroenterology, which is the premier journal in my field, where they took a group of people and they put them on 3 types of breakfast bars. Okay, so you get sent home, you get 1 week each of these 3 different types of bars, and you can't tell the difference between the 3. But one is a placebo, one is concentrated gluten, and one is fructans. Okay, so fructans, which I was mentioning earlier with inulin, fructans are a FODMAP that are found in wheat, barley, and rye. So specifically, those 3 grains contain that. And what they found was very interesting. So the placebo is, of course, our baseline. When people consumed the gluten-containing bars for a week, they had less symptoms than with the placebo.
Interesting.
When people consumed the fructan-containing bar, they were triggered. So the thing about it is we have to zoom out a little bit to say wheat, barley, and rye are not just bags of gluten. There's other elements that exist within these grains. And those elements might be the cause of what we're experiencing. So these fructans, they're not bad. They're actually prebiotic. They're good for our gut. But for people who have a damaged gut, they may struggle to process and digest those foods. If you ferment the bread, it becomes sourdough. It now becomes low FODMAP. The fructan content gets dropped. The gluten content also gets dropped, but there's still gluten in there. Like you can't give sourdough bread to someone who has celiac disease. So now it's a bit of a complex topic because there are people who have celiac disease. They need to be gluten-free. That's non-negotiable. There are people who believe that gluten is causing issues for them. They need to be tested for celiac disease. And the test, most people, they'll go to their doctor. The doctor draws a blood test. Okay, that's a good starting point. But the problem is that there can be false negatives. So there are some people who ultimately require an upper endoscopy with biopsies of their small intestine in order to determine whether or not they have celiac disease. So this is the issue, is that you might have symptoms with gluten-containing foods. You might then go to your doctor and say, do I have celiac? They do a blood test. It says no. And you say, well, I don't have celiac, but I still have these gluten issues. It's still possible that you have celiac disease. That's the point. All right, last thing on this topic. There are people who exist, I know you've heard this, where they go to Italy and they're like, I can eat all the bread in the world over there, right? And they're here in the States and they're like, the bread triggers me. I feel horrible. Why might that be? I don't think it's gluten.
What do you think it is?
Italian bread has just as much gluten as our bread does. I think it's the production of the food. Their wheat is produced in a different way than ours, including the glyphosate.
Yeah, in Italy, it's illegal to use glyphosate as a desiccant.
Exactly.
Oh,
Right. So there we are. So maybe that is the physical manifestation of what happens with glyphosate ingestion, because that's going to be a concentrated amount of glyphosate. Like you're spraying the wheat in order to kill it. So it's not just a gentle mist. You're getting after it there. Right. And it's not even on the packaging.
The way that I eat gluten is I very much consider the dose of the gluten that I'm ingesting. So I will very frequently eat some sourdough bread with breakfast, but then that night at the restaurant, I'm asking whether or not the food that I'm ordering has gluten in it, and I'll be avoiding gluten for dinner. So I try to just be mindful of where it's coming in.
Yeah.
And also to be mindful of the context in which I'm eating it. So if I'm eating it with fiber, if I'm eating it with phytochemicals and antioxidants and things like that, it's fine. But I see my perspective, and I haven't really updated my perspective since I wrote my Genius Foods, but it's that people are just eating gluten all day long. Every snack is gluten-based. Every meal, it's either a sandwich or it's pasta or it's a wrap. And then they're eating this unprecedented quantity of gluten against the backdrop of widespread gut dysbiosis.
Yeah.
So like a complete lack of gut resilience because of our low fiber diets, which I wrote about, and the relative lack of antioxidant phytochemicals that generally support gut health in that way.
Right.
So that's kind of my
I don't have an issue with that. I mean, I think that so I'm not, just to be totally clear on my side, that I'm not here to advocate that sourdough bread is the backbone of your diet. Like how often do I actually consume bread on a weekly basis? Like maybe once or twice in the whole week. It's not that often, right? But I think that transparency of like, is it okay to consume an organic sourdough bread? Yes, it is okay. So, and when it comes to whole grains, what I like about whole grains, and when I say whole grains, I'm talking about things like quinoa, sorghum, teff. I'm not talking about pasta or bread right? That might say like whole wheat.
Do you remember the food pyramid?
Yeah.
Every 24 hours, we were told to eat between 7 to 11 servings of bread and pasta.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. And also, I'm not a huge fan of cereal either, as the purpose to like I think that I've heard you reference the Lucky Charm debacle.
Yeah. From Tufts, yeah.
Yeah. So like that, I would never be on board with.
I mean, I'm friends with Dari. We became, do you know Dari?
Safari?
Yeah. And we've talked about it a bit, and they've updated it. They've improved.
Did they take that out? That was a black eye.
They've improved on it. They've improved on it. In all fairness, but
Okay.
yeah, it was a debacle for good reason.
Yeah, and so like 95% of Americans are deficient in fiber. 98% of Americans actually are deficient in whole grains. Now, I understand that whole grains to some people may sound controversial. To me, this is what I'm talking about: quinoa, sorghum, teff, amaranth, farro, right? That kind of stuff. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about bread. I'm not talking about pasta. So, and it should be organic.
Now, do you believe that these grains should make up the base of one's diet as they were depicted in the now retired food pyramid? Or do you share the perspective that I have that they can be consumed and they can have health benefits, but ultimately that it's kind of like a filler food? They're not the most nutrient dense. Maybe they provide fiber, but they're not staples in my diet.
Yeah.
Like you said you eat bread 2 or 3 times a week, right?
Yeah, not much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like, again, I think in my perspective and the way that I approach these things is very data driven, in the sense that if I hear that 98% of people are deficient in whole grains, then I'm more of the idea of let me push the valuable forms of whole grains that exist. It doesn't mean that you make this the backbone of your diet. Right, I'm not, the things that I named, quinoa, sorghum, teff, amaranth, farro, I'm not consuming those on a daily basis, but I also don't fear them at all. And I do think that like a wonderful burrito bowl with them at the bottom, along with some sort of legume in combination, and then you just start throwing the toppings on. And that may be avocados and jalapenos.
Double serving of grass-fed beef.
Yeah. And cilantro and like whatever it may be, right? You have your version, I have my version. That's okay. But like that to me is actually a quite tasty and healthy meal.
I agree. I completely agree. You promised that we were going to circle back to coffee, so I'm going to hold you to it.
Yeah. Okay. So real quick before we do that, I hope you don't mind.
Yeah.
So F goals. So I said greens and grains, and then we got sort of diverted off there.
Yeah.
Omega-3 super seeds. By the way, that doesn't mean that I think that omega-3 needs are fulfilled automatically just by eating these seeds. I'm more of a believer of test. Like test your omega index.
I did that recently.
And did you find it helpful?
Yeah, it was excellent.
Amazing.
Yeah. Not only that, but my omega-3 to omega-6 ratio was perfect.
No seed oils.
Everything was great. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not lying to us. You're not sneaking the canola on the side.
No, I tweeted it out after I shared it on social media. Yeah, I walked the walk.
All right, 8 to 12% is where we want to be with the omega-3 index. If you have autoimmune disease, you want to be a little bit higher, like 10 to 12%. All right. So, but omega-3 super seeds, the beauty of them is that they have the omega-3s and they have the fiber. So you get both. So that's chia, flax, hemp, and basil seeds. A, aromatics, which means onions and garlic. L, legumes. S is actually a few things. Sulforaphane or sprouts. I'm a big fan of sprouts. This is your omega-3 index?
My omega-3 index, yeah. Okay. So the index was in the
perfect
desirable range.
Yeah, 9%. Good.
And then my 6-to-3 ratio. It's in the green.
Oh, you were right around 4. Perfect. That's where you want to be.
That's where I want to be?
Yeah, that's good.
Well, look at that.
Yeah.
I actually do sort of somewhat know what I'm talking about.
All right. So, yeah. And so L, legumes, S, sprouts, and mushrooms, and finally seaweed. All right. So that's all of F goals. All right. Let's talk about coffee. All right. So coffee is a gut health drink from my perspective.
You just made a lot of people happy.
Yeah. Now, there's going to be some people who are going to get upset, and I'll have something for them on the back end here. All right. So it contains polyphenols like chlorogenic acid. It also actually contains soluble fiber. So that soluble fiber is dissolved in the drink. So you can't detect that it's there, but it's there, and it's going to feed and fuel your gut bugs. It's interesting because there was a signal that existed in a Zoe study where they looked across all of these different people where we knew what they were eating, and we also had their microbiome data, and asked the question, like, what is the most powerful association? Because the most powerful association is basically going to tell you what food is actually making the biggest impact on the microbiome. Like, in essence, it says, if there's this powerful association, then we could test your microbiome and be able to tell that you're eating that food or consuming that beverage. The number one thing was coffee.
Wow.
And it's an interesting thing. It actually made me step back for a moment. And in a way, inspired my prebiotic supplement, because you step back, you go, hold up. This is better than like a kale salad. This is better than any other thing out there. Really? This is the most powerful thing that we have. Coffee, humble coffee. The way that this works is, let's imagine for a moment that you've never had a cup of coffee before. And I introduce this to you. Okay, you consuming this cup of coffee today, by tomorrow, there will be certain microbes that will rise and fall as a result of this cup of coffee. In fact, the research now shows 150 different types of microbes are going to change in response to the fact that you had a cup of coffee. So you get that change, but it's a small change for today. But the issue is tomorrow, you do it again. And that reinforces the change. It actually gets a little bit more imprinted, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And over the course of time, you are consistently reinforcing it, because the thing about coffee drinkers is they're consistent. People, if you're on board, you're 100% on board. All right. So now I should add that it didn't matter whether it was caffeinated or decaf. There are some people that they drink coffee and it gives them insomnia. My wife is like this. So that the good news is decaffeinated coffee is just as good. There are some people who get diarrhea. Again, decaffeinated coffee, just as good. The other option that you have is tea. Tea is going to provide similar benefits. If you get a tea, like a tea protocol or like a tea habit in place where you're consistently consuming it, it's the consistency. That's the key. So basically what we're seeing is consistency is an opportunity for massive change within the gut microbiome. So this is where I sort of look at it like, yes, our diet, we should be trying to take advantage of this. Yes, coffee is great. It's an opportunity. But guess what else? If you had a supplement that actually feeds your gut bacteria what they're looking for on a consistent basis, that's how you can really invoke sufficient change, or like significant change.
Do the benefits count when you load it up with cream and sugar? Or is it better? Are you better off consuming it black or with a little bit of almond milk, a spike of whiskey? What's the best way to consume it?
Alcohol is another story that we could talk about. So actually there was a research study where they gave people cream, heavy cream, and it spiked their LPS levels hard. So, and sugar we know also causes disruption of the gut barrier. So it's preferable to not do those things. Black coffee is something that takes a little bit of time to get used to, but it's one of these things where, like, I don't know how you drink your coffee, but if you start to drink it black, after about a month, you'll start to really enjoy it. Like, you'll get very used to it, and then you'll appreciate the complexities that exist in there.
I drink it black.
Me too.
I make my own cold brew now,
Nice.
as of the past 3 months, and it's my favorite thing to do. I love it.
Amazing. So now alcohol. There are many arguments that exist for alcohol being problematic. Okay. So a few of them. One is that at any amount, alcohol consumption is potentially carcinogenic. That's one of the arguments. The second is that in any amount, it is disruptive to your sleep if you consume alcohol in the evening. Like, it disrupts your REM sleep. All right. But when it comes to the gut microbiome, my opinion changed recently because I came across a study, and actually I think you had it in your book. So, but it took me a while to come across it myself, where they gave people a significant amount of alcohol, and they then checked their blood alcohol level and their lipopolysaccharide level every 30 minutes for the next couple of hours. And what I saw in this study is that as the blood alcohol level went up, so did the lipopolysaccharide level. When the blood alcohol level peaked, so did the lipopolysaccharide level. When the blood alcohol level came down, so did the lipopolysaccharide level, but LPS did not normalize. It did not go to zero until the blood alcohol level went to zero. So this parallel graph, from my perspective, that's not by itself the same as answering the question, can we have one drink a night? It's not the same. But there's enough there that I'm like, you know what? I think I'd rather stay on the side of playing it safe.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I drink, well, follow-up question. Do you think there's a world where the antioxidants, phytochemicals in a drink like red wine might help to offset the, that acutely induced intestinal permeability?
Yes. So, well, so I don't know whether it prevents the disruption of the gut barrier, like on the spot. What I do know is that actually my position on this has changed a little bit in the last few years. So when I wrote Fibre Fueled, which came out in 2020, I said, why would you drink alcohol, red wine, to get resveratrol when you can drink grape juice, right? Or like literally peanuts have resveratrol. Why would you do that? And actually now my position is a little bit different. There's clearly a difference between fermentation and non-fermentation. Fermentation activates the polyphenols. They become more bioactive. They become more bioavailable to us. So it's not a one-to-one comparison. That being said, it's not the alcohol that we're trying to get. It's the polyphenol. So we do have the opportunity, if your goal is specifically the consumption of red wine for the purposes of better gut health, to consume de-alcoholized red wine. And there's actually data that show that the benefits that you get in terms of your gut microbiome are the same with de-alcoholized red wine compared to the ones that do contain alcohol. Now, that being said, of all the alcoholic beverages that exist, which would be the preferable one for your gut? This would be the preferable one. And the other thing that I'll say, like I was, mentioning before, progress over perfection. I'm not saying that I have zero alcohol in my life. If you and I were at a Mind Body Green retreat and we were in the jacuzzi, I would have a glass of alcohol.
Hell yeah, I would love that. Definitely. Yeah, we can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I feel like we live in this era now of perceived perfection on social media, and I think it's like really problematic because when people feel like they can't live up to whatever the projected ideal is, that they're like moral failures, or they're not being as healthy, and I think that's really a problem. It's a very defeatist mindset.
I totally agree, and I think this is one of the issues that exists where you spend too much time on social media, and it drains you of your self-esteem. They've actually shown this with kids. Like kids today are spending an average of 7 hours per day on social media when it only takes 1 hour to actually affect their self-esteem.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, I for the first time in my life, I smoked a cigar the other day. I don't know how you feel about those, but it was a really fun experience. I was with a friend. We were actually celebrating my recent back surgery, and it was a really good time. It's not something I do, with any regularity at all. It was the first time in my life I'd ever tried it. But yeah, I mean, you gotta make room for life's pleasures.
Yeah, but be smart about it, right?
Of course.
So having a cigar, no big deal. But getting rid of alcohol and then replacing it with marijuana that you smoke on a daily basis, that's a different story.
That is a different story. Well, Dr. Will, this was so fun. Loved having you here. You shared a ton of fantastic knowledge. I loved where we got to talk about maybe the areas where we don't necessarily agree completely, but we did find overlap. And I just think you're brilliant. So thanks for sharing your knowledge with us.
Well, dude, it was really good that we got to do this, and it feels like it was many years in the making. And I just wanted to say that one author to another, as someone who writes books, I have appreciation and respect for other people who write books. And I thought you did a really great job of laying out your arguments, and the way that you wrote it, it was very well done and very well referenced.
I appreciate that. Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
You're welcome back anytime. And I've got one last question for you before we get to that. Where can people pick up your books, and where can they find you on social media?
Yeah. So my books are available everywhere that books are sold. I'm also, by the way, very happy for people to borrow my book from the library. Like, that doesn't bother to me. I would much rather you spend time with me in a book than like have the $2.50 that comes from a book sale. I'm not too worried about that.
Wow. I love that you said that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Seriously. I mean, like 100% believe that. So now if you want to support my work and buy the book, like, I appreciate that. That's great. And also, if you buy the book, you can share it with a friend. And that's another great option. So you can find me if you come to my website. It's theguthealthmd.com. I have an email newsletter that's completely free. It's a completely free resource with a community of about 200,000 people, where we're basically having discussions about gut health all the time. I do ask me anythings. So it's quite fun and good. And you'll find me on social media as well as the Gut Health MD. And then for people who want to check out more about 38 Terra, that's our supplement company, 38tera.com. I would encourage you, please check it out. Look at the reviews. The reviews are 100% real. And I'm quite proud of this product and the impact that it's making in people's lives.
Love it, dude. Well, congrats, because I know it's a lot of work getting a product off the ground. So best of luck with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Last question that gets asked everybody on the show. What does living a genius life mean to you?
Okay. So I would say that we didn't even touch on this, but we should have. Because to me, a genius life is a life where you are connected to other people, right? And those bonds that you form with other people, they lift you up in times where you need it. I feel like we're in a world right now, people are feeling very lonely. People are feeling very disconnected. So to me, connection is about finding other people and forming those bonds that occur when you're sitting across the table from one another, looking each other in the eye, not necessarily on social media. And the other form of connection that's really important, which is part of a genius life, is opening up your heart to the possibility of a higher power, something bigger than you, right? And I have my own version of that. I'm not here to promote that version. I'm here to say, I think that we all need that. Like, if you look throughout the entirety of human history, we've always needed that, and we need that right now.
Yeah, I agree. Whatever spirituality and religion don't have to, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have one without the other. You can have both. But I think, yeah, you're so right. It's very important to have.
Yeah, and I think I see these as just different forms of connection to one another, creating that network of support for each other, and also the connection to something bigger than ourselves. Like, understanding our life has a purpose. You are here for a purpose. You're not just a bag of cells and then one day it's over, right? There's something really good that's happening. You're here with intent. So acknowledging that and leaning into that.
Amen. Well, I love your intent, brother.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks for coming out. Thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones. And if it resonated with you, consider leaving a rating and review on your podcast app of choice. It really does help the show grow. And I will catch you on the next episode. Peace.
Boom.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.